Are you ready to unlock your full potential and maximize your productivity? Look no further than Productivity Smarts, the ultimate audio podcast hosted by renowned productivity expert Gerald J. Leonard. In every episode, Gerald shares captivating stories, invaluable tips, and cutting-edge strategies that will transform the way you approach productivity. Whether you're looking to reduce stress, overcome overwhelm, or simply get more done in less time, Productivity Smarts has got you covered. But that's not all. You'll also gain inspiration from real-life success stories of individuals who have achieved greatness through productivity. Plus, you'll learn the latest tools, techniques, and habits that will help you achieve a new level of happiness and fulfillment in your personal and professional life. So why wait? Join us every week as we delve into the exciting world of productivity and help you unleash your full potential. Get ready to take your productivity to the next level with Productivity Smarts. As a productivity expert and host of the Productivity Smarts podcast, Gerald J. Leonard has been a proud supporter of Kiva since 2011. Kiva is a non-profit organization that helps entrepreneurs in third-world countries access the capital they need to start or grow their businesses. By making a small loan through Kiva, you can help these entrepreneurs achieve their dreams, support their families, and contribute to their local economies. And with a repayment rate of over 96%, your loan can be relent to another entrepreneur once it's repaid, creating a ripple effect of positive change. So if you're looking for a meaningful way to make a difference in the world, consider making a loan through Kiva. With loans as small as $25, anyone can be a microlender and help change lives. Visit kiva.org to learn more and start lending today.
So today I am speaking to Tom Hagerty. He is a veteran business strategist, speaker, and author of the book, The Business of Relationships. With over 45 years of executive experience, Tom brings wisdom, humor, and clarity to how relationships impact performance. He helps individuals and organizations strengthen connections, trust, and purpose, boosting productivity through better relationships. Tom, how are you?
Gerald, I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing
really
well,
looking
man.
forward to this.
I really am. As I was saying earlier, and as we were kind of talking about, what we're going to do today, I said, I invite guests on who I want to read their books. When I hear about their books and they pitch me about being on the show and, I hear the title and what the book is about, in my mind, I'm thinking that is a book I would want to read. So it makes me excited every week to be able to do this and to be able to talk to folks like yourself who've really labored and poured a lot of their life and experience. And for just a few hours of time as a consumer or reader, we get to consume all that wisdom. So now before we get into this and get started, which I'm excited to do, I always have a few questions for my guests. And if you listen to my podcast, you know what those are. And that is, what is your favorite style of music?
My absolute favorite style of music, the go-to for Saturday mornings or Tuesday nights, is going to be classic rock. It's going to be anything from Pink Floyd to Genesis to Supertramp to Dire Straits to Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, Bruce Springsteen. It's the folks who climbed the mountain and stayed there for a long time.
Yeah, all of those are legendary musicians and bands that have been out there for a long time. Yeah. So that says you got a good ear and good taste.
And I would say another go-to for me, Gerald, is going to be good old Chicago blues. I mean, if you're talking Coco Taylor and Buddy Guy, all the way to the moderns like Joe Bonamassa, I love the blues. I think it's just a phenomenal genre.
That's awesome, because it's about storytelling, right? It's about emotions and storytelling, and it pulls us in and it takes us back to when things happen in our lives that those songs, remind us of things, right? Is there a song that you have that you specifically love?
I would say yes, and it's going to be a Pink Floyd song, and it's going to be Time from Dark Side of the Moon.
Okay.
I don't think there's a much better line in rock and roll than the one where they say, you run and you run to catch up with the sun, but it's sinking, and it's racing around to come up behind you again. But the sun is the same in a relative way, but you're older and you're shorter of breath and one day closer to death. I mean, that is a compelling lyric. And it's true. It's true when you think about it. Yeah. Every day that we spend, every day that we waste, every day that we don't achieve what we set out to do we are literally marching toward death. And every one of us has an expiration date. We don't know when it is, but it's coming. As Jim Morrison said, nobody gets out of here alive.
Exactly. It reminds me of the line in Hamilton where it says, talking about Alexander Hamilton, that he was writing like a man running out of time. When you know that there's a clock ticking, and you're like, I gotta get so much done because I know I'm not going to be here forever. So let me get as much done and and have an impact. So that reminds me of that statement as well.
Yeah. Hey, Gerald, I would challenge you to find a better opening line in a song than what I'm about to give you. There's a singer-songwriter by the name of Justin Townes Earl that my younger son turned me on to. It was not a person that I would have listened to on my own.
Right.
He has a song called The Saint of Lost Causes.
Okay.
And the opening line, think about introducing yourself to a young lady in a tavern like this, okay? His opening line in the song, he says, I'm a bad dream, but not a nightmare because I'm too pretty for that. And it's a pretty good bluesy song. So it's in the genre. My son knew I would like it.
There you go. That's really good. Yeah. I'm impressed because you have all these lines from these songs that you've memorized, and you can tell that you're saying them from the heart because you're just pouring it out there. So that's really cool. Well, listen, what do you feel like has helped you? Obviously, you've had a great career, and now you're in a point where it seems like you're giving back, right? With, sharing your knowledge and sharing your wisdom and the importance of relationships and kind of like, again, the things that we talked about previously. What do you feel like is the one thing that's helped you to become successful throughout your career?
I really think it's an ability to be intrapreneurial and entrepreneurial. I think that the people who are going to be successful are going to be the people that understand the process and seek ways on how to improve that.
Right.
I think that's what business is all about. And the people who want to punch clocks and put in time and sit in a cubicle are going to be the ones that are at risk as we proceed further and further into AI, further and further into automation. I pity the paralegals that are out there that are just pushing papers around because their jobs are going to be replaced, the administrative assistants, the folks who don't want to go the extra mile or extra yard even are going to be at great risk. And I think that was one of the things, Gerald, that really stimulated me intellectually as well. I mean, it wasn't a hard thing to do. If you're wired in such a way where you want to improve your surroundings, both personally and professionally, then you're going to succeed. You just have to be wired that way. And I think it's going to be absolutely critical as we go into the back half of the century or the next 5 years even. It's going to be absolutely critical that people are intrapreneurial if they're in a company and entrepreneurial if they're starting their own ventures.
Right. And we really are in a time where you have to constantly be learning and growing and reading, listening, and developing yourself, because I was talking to someone just about music, and we were talking about how in a 10-year span in the 80s that there were so many songs, like, maybe 900,000 songs written during that whole decade, right? Mm-hmm. And that now, almost on a daily basis across the globe, there's like, that number of songs just being released because of AI and technology. And so we're drowning in information and in data. And if you don't develop the skills to learn how to differentiate what's important and what's not, understand the relationships that are going to help you get to the next level, because, we only grow by a couple of things. One, the books we read and the people we meet, right? And so by finding the right books and the right material, because not everything out there is golden, right? Some of it's just stuff, and it's not, it's not really worth it, and it's not going to help us grow. But some of it is going to, like your book, is going to help us to grow and understand. But also by taking consideration of what you're writing about, the business of relationships, by having great relationships, that's a game changer, because relationships are where you're able to position yourself or get positioned into opportunities that you would never have. I'm not a self-made man. I don't think anyone is, but I know it is because of relationships and the relationships I've forged through networking that have allowed me to grow and build and do the things that I'm doing, whether it's Steve Harrison, Jack Canfield, or Les Brown, or whoever. These folks have really made an impact in my life, and relationships are critical for us right now.
Yeah, absolutely, they are. I'll take apart your observation maybe in a couple of different ways. One is, I think you're absolutely on point about the flood of content that we have. I was privileged as a young man. I was privileged to go to a Jesuit Catholic high school and a Jesuit Catholic university, and then Jesuit Catholic postgraduate work.
Right.
And what the Jesuits teach you, it's a very disciplined approach to how you think.
Right.
And they urge you to think critically, to look at sources, to look at credibility before you make a judgment on that particular thing. And I think our society today is suffering from this flood of content. You see it on your computer every day with MSN pop-ups and the CNA, so on and so forth. All of these little tile boxes that urge you into doom scrolling.
Yes.
And you look at the source and say, I've never heard of that publication. I don't know who that is. I can't verify its accuracy.
Right.
People are walking away from, and I don't want to sound like a curmudgeon, but people are walking away from the proven sources like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, PBS. You've got to narrow that intake a bit.
Right.
Or you're just going to suffer from content overload, and you're going to be a mile wide and an inch deep.
Exactly.
And I don't know anybody that wants to do that. As far as relationships are concerned, though, I think you're exactly on point there as well. And when you look at some of the trends in business, where we now have names for things like bare minimum Mondays, culture hangovers, quiet quitting, the great resignation. But the one that really struck me was there's a phrase now called workplace ghosting.
Yes.
And basically it is the employee, the prospective employee, becoming disinterested in the company who has made an offer to him, and he simply ghosts them in the recruitment process. Right. Or even worse, the employee who quits and simply walks away and doesn't bother to tell his boss, her boss, doesn't bother to tell an HR person, doesn't even often bother to tell his colleagues in the cubicle farm.
Right.
He just says, I'm done. And what happens in that, when you speak to relationships, those young people are damaging the relationship that could be the rung that gets them up the ladder later on. It gets them into the entrepreneurial venture. Right. Later on. It gets them a network later on.
Right.
And it's so short-sighted for people to say, I did it because I never thought I would be back at that company again. Didn't want to be.
Right.
Well, that's fine, but that's disrespect, and it's really disempowering you from having the kind of relationship that can help you in the future.
Exactly.
Why burn a bridge? Why burn a bridge?
Right. And I think what it is that because certain generations, and I think all the generations are getting hit with this now, that you go to dinner and the table is sitting there and everybody's on their phone. They're not talking to each other anymore. I was driving somewhere earlier today and I was following a lady in a really nice car, and she was weaving and bobbing. And as I passed her, I looked down and she had her phone right in front of her, and she was just tunnelly focused. And I'm thinking, you're going to, for $1,000 phone, you're going to wreck a $40,000 car, right? It's that kind of mindset. But, in fact, this ghosting question is one of the questions I have for you in your book. So I'm going to go ahead and use this as an excuse to dive into your book. Okay. So, because the idea of ghosting, and when you think about it, the example you gave, and let me just share this, I think it is because people are not being taught the power of networking and relationships when it comes to life and business, not just business, but life and business. Because if you listen to successful people, whether it's a tennis star who just won an open, or, a golfer who did something, or a football coach who used to be an assistant, now he's a head coach, every one of them can tell you about the relationships of people that mentored them, made phone calls, connected them, opened doors, and help them to move into areas that they could never have moved into on their own. So my question is, what can leaders who are having to deal with this ghosting concept, what can leaders do to create an environment where people feel invested and want to stay and want to understand these relationships and want to nurture and grow?
I think it's really a two-part question. The first part I would say is, what is causing it? This is not a cultural thing. It's not an age thing. It's a time thing, I believe, and when you look at it and you say there's things like, decreased productivity, there is definite workplace burnout. There is definitely an impact post-pandemic. There has been, a lot of difficulty that we have faced, and many times the employer is at great risk because they're not sensitive to the needs of the employee and where they are. So I would say that's one thing. But as far as leaders are concerned, I think you have to be, number one, and I speak to this a bit in the book in various parts, but I think you have to be transparent. I think the younger employee today is expecting transparency at the top.
Yeah.
And I think a leader needs to be capable of doing that in a way that will be meaningful to those employees.
Right.
I think another thing that I would say, in addition to transparency, is you have to provide opportunities for exchange.
Yeah.
It cannot be a top-down approach. It cannot be something where the boss says and I do.
Right.
There has to be some capability to have an exchange of ideas, to accord mutual respect, to give people their due, even though the titles may be different and the levels may be different. They are all individual contributors,
right?
And they are all essential to the business. And I think that's, going to be something that we have to see more and more of. I think there's, a lot of questions around what is the work experience itself? Is it negative? Is the boss fostering or approving or winking at a negative, confrontational environment? And if they are, they have to change it because there's just too many other opportunities for employees. And I think you got to be on the watch for burnout. I think you've got to be on the watch for just the interruptions of the workday that decrease productivity. You're a productivity expert. You see that all the time. I think that those are the kind of things that I think the leadership has to be aware of. But I think really fundamentally where it all starts is transparency. If you cannot look in the mirror and you cannot say that I will be honest and forthright and upfront and direct with my employees, and I'll give them their respect that they're due, and I will trust them to do what I need them to do. And if you can't be transparent, I think it's a recipe for failure.
Exactly. It made me think about a number of things. And one of the things that I've done is, as I've come up with my questions for you, I've also looked at some of the quotes, because you have a lot of quotes in your book. And, depends on how much reading you do, you may not be aware of some of the people that you're quoting. But one of the quotes that stood out to me was W. Clement Stone's.
Okay.
Right. So it's not a popular name that you hear every day on television. It's like, who is that? Well, go back and look him up. But W. Clement Stone, in fact, I think Jack Canfield worked for him and knew him. But he had a quote in that said, "Tell everyone what you want to do, and someone will want to help you do it."
Exactly.
And that's really what you're talking about. So it's a two-way street, right? It is leaders, and I won't say boss, I'd say leaders of corporations or organizations have to be transparent and open, right? Because that creates being what we call authentic. That creates a bonding trust where you feel like you can trust them and that they have your best interest at heart. But also, they need to lead by example, right? They need to, just like, W. Clement Stone is saying, tell people what you want to do. Tell your employees what you want to do. Be open and real with them. Tell them where the company is going. Give them a bigger vision. And if they buy into it and they buy into the culture, they're going to want to help you do it. But at the same time, and I want your thoughts on this one, as a leader, you have to lead by example. So if you're saying I'm going to have a thought leadership organization, then guess who has to be the biggest thought leader in the organization?
Exactly.
It has to be the leader.
I would say there's another quote in the book that you may have come across: a real tough guy boss. I mean, this guy was no holds barred. He was a tough dude, and he made a lot of acquisitions, and he did a lot of deals, and he sharpened his elbows in the boardroom. But Harold Janine with AT&T had a quote in the book that said, "You cannot just give the employees the oar. You have to get in the boat and row with them."
Yes.
And I'm paraphrasing that a bit because the quote was much longer. But, Janine was really saying that you can't afford to be the leader who is just the mouthpiece, who is just the guy on TV, who is just the lady in the boardroom or whatever. You have to get down in the trenches. And as you said so eloquently, if you want to be a thought leader, you better be the number one thought leader in the company. You can't delegate that kind of thing.
Exactly. And it reminds me of this concept I heard a couple of days ago in one of the programs I'm in. And it was that leaders are like birds. And so you have a seagull, you have an eagle, you have a goose, and you have a dove. The seagull is the one that squawks, makes a lot of noise, steals food, and craps over everything. Right? The goose flies in formation, and if one of the geese get hurt, a couple of the goose will come out of line, fly with them, and stay with them until they're better or they pass away. An eagle is setting the pace, and he's making it happen, but he has a nest, or she has a nest, and they're raising the other eagles to be eagles. And so they're training the eagles to be eagles, right? And they're setting examples of what it means to be an eagle. And the dove is the leader who has great relationships, who's caring, who's always there. So obviously no one wants to be the seagull. But as you were saying earlier, if a boss comes in and all you hear is squawk, 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 and poop, poop, it's like he comes in and it's like, okay, there's a lot of noise and it stinks. That's no one's going to want to stay in that situation.
Right. No, there's no question about it. I think, one of the quotes, one of the favorite things that I wrote about in the book was one on resilience from Sheryl Sandberg.
Okay.
And Sheryl Sandberg, I mean, what a storied career, from being the administrative aide to Larry Summers when he was at the Department of the Treasury under the Clinton administration. She matriculates from there into the Google atmosphere and achieved big things there. Then she matriculates into the Facebook atmosphere and really taught them how to make money in that world.
Right.
And she lost her husband. She lost her husband suddenly on a vacation. So this is a lady who has the street cred to be able to say something like this. And she was in the midst of the Cambridge Analytica scandal at Facebook when Mark Zuckerberg threw her under the bus, and she took the blame for it, in the 2016 election year. And Sheryl Sandberg had this quote. She said, "Each one of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done." And you think about how powerful that is, not just from the source, the lady who said it, but think about the meaning behind that she's saying to herself. And she's also saying by inference to her employees and her colleagues that each one of us, not the ones who pray the most, not the ones who give the most money to their university, not the ones who coach the most little league teams. Right. She said each one of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. Right. I'm pretty passionate about that when it comes to employee relationships. And I think if the boss was able to recognize that more, to your point earlier in the conversation, if the boss was able to recognize that, I think we'd have a lot more productive workplaces where you just would give grace.
Exactly. One of the things that I got from the book was that every problem is a relationship problem. When it comes down to it, there are things that are problems where it's like the door doesn't work, or I need to take my car in for maintenance or something. Things like that happen. But when it comes to real life problems, it's usually problems between people, whether it's divorce or whether it's a business venture gone bad. It's a relationship problem. It's a lack of trust, integrity, and so on. How can a mindset of that, or what kind of mindset should a business leader have to reframe and resolve performance issues in an organization when you realize that your core problems are people problems.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the characteristics that I talked about that are fundamental to good personal relationships transition very well to business, because
Yep.
we're not just talking about familial things and collegial things and so forth. When you talk about needing perspective, when you talk about having integrity, when you talk about establishing trust and
Right.
courting respect, and having some kind of an appropriate sense of risk and some kind of an orientation to productive change, and on, through the 12 qualities that are fundamental to good personal relationships, I think those have to be your touchstones in business. If you have a performance issue with a colleague, with a subordinate, let's say, and you want to confront that head on, you can do that by having some perspective that what I want to have as the outcome, what I want the long-term thing to be, is good. So I want to lead this employee toward that. So I'm going to have a perspective toward the long term. I want that employee to trust me.
Right.
I want that employee to believe that I'm being honest with him or her.
Right.
On down the line, through giving them priority, giving them a sense of being able to be resilient. If I'm in front of you, Gerald, and we're having a tough time with an issue that I think you ought to be better at, or a presentation that could have gone better had you been more prepared, I want you to be left from that conversation with a sense that I can be resilient. I can bounce back from this.
Right.
Tom is being fair with me. He's being honest with me. He's being upfront with me. He might even be a little profane with me, but I can be resilient. I can come back from this, and I can recommit myself to the company. So
Exactly. Now, you have a quote from Walt Disney, and I love this quote. And you say, "You can design and create and build the most wonderful place in the world, but it takes people to make the dream a reality."
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And it's kind of what we're talking about, that, some of our biggest problems are people problems, our problems in relationships. But for any dream or anything to get done that is worth being done, and that is this big, wonderful place, or wonderful, world of, and so on, it's going to require people to make it work. Let me ask you, why did you choose that? Why did you highlight that one in the book?
I really like the quote because I knew how Disney said it. Disney was talking about his own amusement park, saying that you can do these wonderful things, have these great rides, and so forth and so on, but you need people to experience the joy of that. And I looked at that quote and said, wow, that is something that speaks to me about perspective. And when I think about personal relationships, the stuff we accumulate, the house we live in, the car we drive, the watch we wear, the golf club that we belong to, all of that stuff is extraneous. It's almost meaningless, as I said in the book, if you don't have somebody to sit on that expensive leather couch with you and watch the big screen. If you don't have somebody next to you in the golf cart, I don't care what club you belong to, it's going to be a lonely 18 holes.
Exactly.
It's not fun. How many of us have gone into a tavern, a bar, whatever, and said, I'm all alone here drinking beer and I'm totally happy? I don't think people like that exist. If you're alone in a bar and you're isolated, sitting at the end and you're shoving beers down, I think you're a deeply unhappy person.
Exactly. You're drowning in your sorrows.
And I think that's what Disney was getting at, is that all of the trappings are meaningless if we don't have the people around us to share that with. And that's in a corporate setting, it's in a familial setting. And Disney was not a perfect guy. I've had some criticism, not so far from you, but I've had some criticism for some of the people that landed in the book. And my response to that is none of these people are saints. They are oftentimes tough-minded business people, came up through a very entrepreneurial, difficult situation. Steve Jobs inspired great loyalty, but he was a tough person to work for. Jack Welch was the same.
Yeah.
People have divorces. They have wrecked relationships. They are philanderers. They are spendthrifts. They're whatever they are. Some of them landed in prison. Some didn't. None of them are saints. But my old saying was always, I heard this a long time ago, that saints have a past and sinners have a future. So So let's not pretend that these people are going to be canonized anytime soon.
Right.
But what they did was they built thriving companies and they fostered good relationships within those, with their customers, their shareholders, their employees, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's the measure. And that was my benchmark for what is the quote, who said it, what is their credibility in business,
Right.
and does it make sense in the context of a personal relationship? And that was it. So I love the Disney quote. I love the Jack Welch quote too.
Yeah, yeah. Let's go down another alley here for a second, another road, if you will, and that's the area of trust. Trust is a major theme in the work that you have in your book and the things that you talk about. What steps can an individual take to rebuild trust in a team that gets fractured? So if you're in an environment where you're having difficult conversations, things are challenging, and you figure out a way to move forward, what can you as a team member and what can you as a leader do to help rebuild that trust?
I'm going to assume that the trust has been fractured because of something internal to the organization,
Sure.
not something outside. So if it's internal to the organization, I think it's incumbent upon the leader, first and foremost. We talked about it earlier, transparency.
Right.
I think the leader, in addition to that transparency, has to be able to say, I am going to communicate with you as honestly and as accurately as possible about the dire nature of this situation, this fractured trust in the team. Let's say I have to be able to say, here are the potential outcomes. Here are the things that we need to do to avoid the worst of those outcomes.
Right.
Number one, number two, number three. And I need you as a colleague, as a team member, as a direct report of mine, I need you to be able to do these kind of things.
Right.
And that leader has to be able to be strong enough to say, now I'll take questions.
Yeah.
Now I will engage in dialogue, because this is not, again, top down. You're not going to fix a trust issue by declaring to fix it.
Right. Exactly.
You are going, and I think the team members on their part, if the trust has been fractured, the team members have to be able to be courageous enough. And we all know what courage is, but I would say they have to be courageous enough to be equally transparent as to why the trust was fractured.
Right.
And how hurtful that was, or how damaging that was to the objectives, or this is why the deadline was missed, or the project didn't come to fruition,
right,
or the contract didn't get signed, or whatever that was that broke trust in the team. I think they have to be courageous enough to do that. And I think that comes back to the point we talked about earlier, is that people who are intrapreneurial in a company are the most valuable people you could have, because they're the ones who see the process. They're the ones who see the breakdown. They're the ones who see the holes in the armor, so to speak. And you need to count on them, and you need to incentivize them, and also give them the opportunity to be courageous. But fundamentally, that employee has to be able to step out. They can't be sitting back saying, yes, I heard the boss. Yes, I agree with you. Yes, I'll do better. And then they go off and have lunch, and the sniping and the backbiting and everything else goes right back to normal. So.
Exactly. Well, listen, I have one more question for you. And again, there's so much more that we could have talked about, just the various concepts and topics that you have in the book. Again, tons of amazing quotes and background information, but a lot of good insight into why relationships are so critical. And if you could give one piece of advice to a leader or to a person wanting to boost their team's productivity through better relationships, what would that be?
I would say this, and I'm going to go to a quote in the book.
Okay.
When I say this, I think a simple 5-word mantra could serve a lot of executives very well. and a lot of employees very well for that matter as well. And that 5-word mantra would be change before you have to. Okay. I worked at GE in the Jack Welch years. Never got the pleasure of meeting the guy, met his second in command, blah, blah, blah. Had some close brushes with fame, if you will. But when you understand the context of how Jack Welch said that, he said it in a speech to his business leaders in New York when he was pretty new to the CEO realm.
Right.
And he said to them, if you're not number 1 or number 2 in your marketplace, I will fix you, close you, or sell you. Now, that is a very transparent boss. When he followed that with change before you have to, that was the marching order.
Right.
But when I look at relationships, and I think this is true of executives as well as just everyday people, you and me and everyone else trying to make our way through life. Change before you have to. The budding addiction. Change before you have to. The passive-aggressive nature with your wife and kids that is destructive in the family. Change before you have to your financial irresponsibility. And you could go on and on and on.
Right.
And that's true in business as well. So I would say to an executive as well as an employee, if you have that 5-word mantra at the front of your cortex, change before you have to, you will seek opportunities to make a difference. You will seek opportunities to be better.
Right.
If you believe that you should be changing before you have to. None of us wants to be forced into a situation that is too little, too late.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to end this segment. Tom, if someone wants to get to know how to find you, how to buy your book, how to get you to come and speak for them, hire you, where should they go and what should they do?
Well, the book is on Amazon as well as many other outlets, but Amazon is always the easiest, and it's The Business of Relationships. You can look it up. Tom Hagerty is the author. There's a Tom Hagerty out there that wrote a book called The Psychology of Horse Racing. That's not me. My book is The Business of Relationships. My website is thetomhagerty.com, and I would be more than happy and have done some corporate gigs and speaking engagements and so forth. So look me up, and businessofrelationships@gmail.com is another way to get a hold of me. So it's out there, but it's been a pleasure to be with you, Gerald. It's been wonderful.
Excellent. Well, Tom, this has been a great conversation. I've learned so much, and you've given me a book to put in my bookshelf that I can use as a reference, because you have so much content in there. You have so many quotes and so many great examples. I think it'll definitely be something I'll come back to multiple times throughout the rest of my life as I continually work on my own growth and take the mantra that you said, to change before I have to. Thanks so much, Tom.
All right, Gerald, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
If you're enjoying the content and finding it valuable, we would appreciate it if you could take a moment and leave us a review. Your feedback is important to us and helps us reach a wider audience. If you leave us a 5-star review, it would mean the world to us. Not only does it help us improve the podcast, but it also helps us attract more sponsors and grow our community. Thank you again for your support and for listening to the Productivity Smarts podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to Productivity Smarts, where we help you achieve your goals and live your best life. We hope you've gained valuable insights and actionable strategies to boost your productivity and increase your happiness and fulfillment. Remember to apply what you've learned and keep striving towards your goals. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring episodes and expert advice from our host, Gerald J. Leonard. Until next time, keep pushing forward and unleashing your productivity smarts.